Germany after World War I was a nation in deep crisis. The war had left the country in a state of devastation, with cities reduced to rubble and the infrastructure in shambles. The once thriving urban centres now lay in ruins, a stark reminder of the conflict's destructive power. The war's end brought not only defeat but also economic collapse, social unrest and political turmoil. The German people faced severe hardships, with widespread poverty and unemployment becoming the norm. Bread lines stretched through the streets as citizens struggled to find food and basic necessities. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed harsh terms on Germany, including territorial losses, disarmament, and heavy reparations payments. These conditions were seen as humiliating and unjust by many Germans, further deepening the sense of national despair and anger. This fueled resentment and instability within German society. Protests and demonstrations became frequent as people voiced their discontent with the government's inability to address their grievances. The social fabric of the nation was fraying, and the sense of unity that had once existed was now replaced by division and discord. The German economy lay in ruins. Factories that had once been the backbone of the industrial sector were now silent and abandoned. Businesses closed their doors, unable to cope with the economic downturn. The loss of jobs and income created a ripple effect, impacting every aspect of daily life. Hyperinflation spiraled out of control, wiping out savings and plunging millions into poverty. The value of the German mark plummeted, and people found themselves needing wheelbarrows full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. This economic chaos eroded trust in the financial system and the government. Unemployment soared, exacerbating social tensions. The jobless lined the streets, desperate for work and a means to support their families. The lack of employment opportunities led to widespread frustration and a sense of hopelessness among the populace. Political violence became commonplace, with street clashes between left-wing and right-wing groups. These confrontations often turned violent, with paramilitary groups and political factions battling for control and influence. The streets of Germany became a battleground, reflecting the deep ideological divides within the country. The old imperial order had crumbled, leaving a power vacuum in its wake. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated, marking the end of the German Empire. This sudden shift in power created uncertainty and instability, as various factions vied to fill the void left by the monarchy's collapse. The Kaiser abdicated, and a fragile new democracy, the Weimar Republic, was established. This new government faced the daunting task of rebuilding a nation shattered by war and internal strife. The Weimar Republic sought to bring stability and democracy to Germany, but it was met with significant challenges from the outset. However, the Republic faced opposition from both the left and the right. Left-wing groups demanded more radical changes, while right-wing factions sought a return to authoritarian rule. This political polarization made it difficult for the Weimar government to implement effective policies and maintain order. In this atmosphere of chaos and uncertainty, the Freikorps emerged as a powerful and destabilizing force. These paramilitary groups, composed largely of former soldiers, took it upon themselves to combat perceived threats to the nation. Their actions often undermined the authority of the Weimar government and contributed to the overall instability. These paramilitary groups, composed largely of former soldiers, would play a significant role in shaping the course of German history in the years to come. Their influence extended beyond mere street battles as they became involved in political events and movements that would eventually lead to the rise of more extreme ideologies and the eventual downfall of the Weimar Republic. The Freikorps, meaning Free Corps, were volunteer paramilitary units formed in the aftermath of World War I. These groups emerged during a time of great instability and uncertainty in Germany, as the nation grappled with the consequences of a devastating war and the collapse of its imperial government. They were composed primarily of demobilized soldiers, many of whom were disillusioned with the war's outcome and unwilling to return to civilian life. These men had experienced the horrors of the trenches and found it difficult to reintegrate into a society that seemed to have moved on without them. These veterans often felt betrayed by the government and the peace treaty. The Treaty of Versailles, in particular, was seen as a humiliating defeat, imposing harsh penalties and territorial losses on Germany. This sense of betrayal and loss fueled a desire for retribution and a return to a perceived former glory. The Freikorps first emerged in late 1918 and early 1919. They quickly became a significant force in the chaotic post-war environment, filling the power vacuum left by the disintegration of the German military and the abdication of the Kaiser. Their initial purpose was to combat communist uprisings and maintain order in the wake of Germany's defeat. The Spartacist Uprising in January 1919 was one of the first major conflicts where the Freikorps played a crucial role, brutally suppressing the communist revolt in Berlin. They were often better equipped and more experienced than the fledgling Weimar Republic's army. Many Freikorps members retained their military gear and weapons from the war, giving them a significant advantage over the newly formed and poorly equipped government forces. These units were highly decentralized and varied in size, composition, and ideology. Some were small bands of a few dozen men, while others grew into large formations numbering in the thousands. Some were relatively small and localized, while others grew into large, well-organized formations. This diversity made the Freikorps a complex and multifaceted phenomenon, with each unit having its own unique characteristics and motivations. Some Freikorps units leaned towards the political right, while others were more apolitical, driven primarily by a desire for adventure, camaraderie, or employment. The political landscape of post-war Germany was highly fragmented, and the Freikorps reflected this diversity of thought and purpose. Regardless of their specific motivations, the Freikorps shared a common thread: a deep-seated nationalism, a belief in German military superiority, and a willingness to use violence to achieve their goals. This made them both a stabilizing and destabilizing force, as they sought to impose their vision of order through force. This made them a volatile and unpredictable force in the fragile new German Republic. Their actions during this period would have lasting impacts on the political and social landscape of Germany, setting the stage for future conflicts and the eventual rise of more extreme political movements. The Freikorps were driven by a complex mix of motivations. These paramilitary groups, composed largely of World War I veterans, emerged in the chaotic aftermath of the war. They were not just soldiers, they were men with a mission, fueled by a potent blend of ideology and personal ambition. One primary objective was to restore order to a society teetering on the brink of chaos. Post-war Germany was a nation in turmoil, with political instability, economic hardship, and social unrest threatening to tear it apart. The Freikorps saw themselves as the last line of defense against anarchy. They saw themselves as defenders of law and order against the perceived threat of communist revolution. The spectre of communism loomed large, and the Freikorps were determined to prevent a Bolshevik-style takeover in Germany. The Bolshevik takeover in Russia in 1917 had sent shockwaves through Germany, fueling fears of a similar uprising. The success of the Bolsheviks in Russia was a stark warning, and many in Germany feared that the same fate could befall their own country. Nationalism was another powerful motivating factor. The Freikorps were deeply patriotic, and their sense of national pride had been wounded by Germany's defeat in the war. The Freikorps were deeply resentful of Germany's defeat and humiliation in World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, with its harsh terms and punitive reparations, was seen as a national disgrace. They rejected the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which they considered a dictated peace. The treaty's conditions were viewed as unjust and humiliating, and the Freikorps were determined to overturn them. Many Freikorps members yearned for the restoration of Germany's former glory and territorial integrity. They longed for a return to the days when Germany was a powerful and respected nation on the world stage. Anti-communism was perhaps the most unifying element within the Freikorps movement. The fear of communism was pervasive, and it brought together men from diverse backgrounds and political beliefs. They viewed communism as a foreign ideology that threatened the very fabric of German society. To the Freikorps, communism was not just a political threat, it was an existential one. The Freikorps were often deployed to crush communist uprisings and break up strikes organized by left-wing groups. Their actions were brutal and uncompromising, reflecting their belief that they were fighting for the survival of their nation. Beyond these broad objectives, individual Freikorps units often had their own specific agendas and motivations. Some units were driven by local concerns, while others had more ambitious political goals. Some were driven by a desire for adventure or a yearning for the camaraderie of the trenches. For many veterans, the war had been a formative experience, and they found it difficult to adjust to civilian life. Others were motivated by economic necessity, seeking employment and a steady income in a time of widespread unemployment. The post-war economy was in shambles, and for many men, joining the Freikorps was a way to provide for their families. The Freikorps were not a monolithic group. They were a diverse collection of individuals united by a common cause. Their legacy is complex and controversial, reflecting the turbulent times in which they lived. Today, the Freikorps are remembered as both defenders of order and as precursors to more extreme nationalist movements. Their story is a reminder of the power of ideology and the impact of historical events on the lives of individuals. Understanding the Freikorps is essential to understanding the broader history of Germany in the early 20th century. Their actions and motivations provide insight into the complex interplay of order, nationalism, and anti-communism that shaped the era. The legacy of the Freikorps continues to be a subject of debate and reflection, illustrating the enduring impact of their actions on German history and society. The Freikorps were involved in a wide range of actions and engagements during their brief but tumultuous existence. One of their first major deployments was to the Baltics, where they fought against Bolshevik forces and helped to secure the independence of Latvia and Lithuania. In Germany itself, the Freikorps were frequently used to suppress communist uprisings and workers' strikes. They played a key role in putting down the Spartacist Uprising in Berlin in January 1919, a failed attempt by communist revolutionaries to seize power. The Freikorps' brutal suppression of the uprising, which included the murders of communist leaders Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, set a dangerous precedent for political violence. The Freikorps were also involved in numerous other clashes with left-wing groups, including the Bavarian Soviet Republic in 1919 and the Ruhr Uprising in 1920. Their willingness to use violence against fellow Germans, often with the tacit approval of the Weimar government, highlighted the fragility of the new democracy and the deep divisions within German society.